Hello everybody and welcome to Nucleus Network's first ever live Q&A event. Today is May 20th, which is International Clinical Trials Day. So to celebrate, we thought we'd open up the floor and answer any questions you may have about clinical trials. Just comment on this post and your questions will be put to our speakers. Up first, I'd like to introduce our Medical Director of Brisbane site, Associate Professor Paul Griffin. Paul, could you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, great. Look, thanks everyone for tuning in. It's great to be able to talk to people on such a big day of Clinical Trials Day. I've been involved in clinical trials for over 12 years now. As Josh said, I'm the Medical Director of the Brisbane site. I'm also a medical specialist with training in both clinical infectious diseases and clinical microbiology. And I've been working in clinical trials for over 12 years. I've overseen around 125 clinical trials and been involved in some way in well over 200, and I have fellowships from a few different colleges as well as a bachelor's degree in science in microbiology and immunology, but I really like clinical trials for so many reasons, particularly because it has such a fundamental role in developing both new drugs and new vaccines, and particularly at the moment we've seen how much of an impact a new vaccine, for example, can have. So it's a great space to be involved in. I feel really privileged every day to be able to oversee these sort of trials and help develop new medicines and vaccines.
Fantastic. And with Paul today, we have Hannah, who's participated in a clinical trial with us previously. Hannah, thank you for coming along.
Thanks for having me here, guys. Excited to have a chat to some people.
Excellent. Well, we'll kick off then. We've already had some questions come through in the comments. Megan Barth asked, does doing clinical trials affect your ability to donate blood or plasma? Paul, if you could fill that one.
Look, it's a good question, and the main thing I'll say is for all of our trials, we go through all of those sort of things very specifically with each and every volunteer so they know exactly what's in store for them when they participate in our clinical trials and what sort of implications there might be. For the vast majority of trials, there'd be no problem donating blood after the trial was concluded particularly, but as I say, for a small selection of our trials, that may have to be delayed a little bit, but again, we would go through that in detail with each and every volunteer so that there's no surprises by participating in our trials.
Excellent. And Hannah, do you have any input on that one?
Yeah, I'm actually a regular plasma donator myself. So something along the lines of that was really important for me to know when I signed up for my clinical trial. And in my case, I was super happy to hear that it didn't have any impact on me for all. So it was great.
Excellent. Well, we have another couple of questions that have come through already. Michael Grocott asked, do you have to be fit and healthy to take part in trials, or do you accept people who have underlying conditions?
That's a great question, and again, it is something that we'd talk to people about with all of our different trials. So for the majority of our trials, we do what's called phase 1, which is where we test things in healthy volunteers. So we are pretty strict there, and that's mostly so that we can get the most information out of doing those trials. So for most of those proper phase 1 trials, we do want people that are relatively fit and well. But we do a range of trials where some of those things aren't necessarily quite as strict. And what we do is we make that really clear to people what sort of volunteers we're looking for and what sort of exclusion and inclusion criteria there might be. So again, that's something you can have a look at when you're considering participating in trials.
Excellent. A question that's come through from a few different people is just, is it safe?
And I can maybe start with that one. And the short answer there is yes. So a lot of work goes into preparing, excuse me, to get anything to start in clinical trials. We do lots of studies in laboratories as well as animals. So we have a very high degree of certainty that whatever we're taking into our clinic is both safe and likely to be effective. Again, there's no medicine or vaccine that doesn't have the potential for some side effects. And we go through those potential side effects in great detail with each and every volunteer. But just like we've heard with the vaccines that have been approved recently, with each of the things we trial in our clinic, we are very confident the benefits far outweigh the risks, or we wouldn't even consider doing the trial.
Excellent. And Hannah, could you comment on how safe you felt?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, I felt totally safe the whole time. You're being constantly monitored and checked in on by so many nurses. Everyone's always making sure that you're looked after, well fed, feeling okay the whole time I was there. So I honestly wasn't sure going into it how safe I would feel, but after the experience, 100% confident in the whole process.
Excellent. We just had a question come through from Zara. She's just asking, she was born in the UK during the mad cow disease years. Does that rule her out of trials?
That's a great question, and the short answer there is no. I don't recall any trial where that's been a relevant exclusion criteria, so you'd be fine to participate in the vast majority of trials.
Easy done. One that has come through was an early request saying, Hannah, did you get superpowers after your participation?
Sadly, nothing to report yet. I wouldn't have minded a few extra inches of height. I'm quite short, but no, nothing long-term affecting me at all.
Well, that's valuable knowledge, I think. I've had another question come through. I applied before. Why do you need to know my BMI? Paul.
Yeah, another good question. So like I was sort of saying earlier, for our phase 1 trials, where it's the first time some of these medicines are being used in people, we do have quite strict criteria. So I do apologise if anyone is excluded, but that's so we can make sure we test these products in a really controlled way. So we use people at a fairly narrow spectrum of age and height and weight, as well as often not allowing any medical problems. We know that's not real world and not the population ultimately we're going to use these things in, but because it's the first trials and we're just starting to get all the information we need to be certain that these things are safe and effective, we are pretty strict early on. So that will mean, unfortunately, that some people that are still by definition healthy might be excluded, and that can happen based on BMI. And again, I do apologise for that, but it is for good reason. We don't take those sort of things lightly. And again, that's something that if people are keen to come along and have a look, if they are excluded, we can go through the reasons why they might be excluded at the time.
No problem. Megan's just followed up her earlier question with the second part, which is, what about potential health life insurance eligibility after participating?
Yeah, that's a good question. And obviously things like life insurance, I'd always defer to the individual insurers because they each have their own fairly complicated rules, to be honest. I can't actually think, though, why participating in any of our clinical trials would have any impact on life insurance. So certainly what we do would not have a bearing on that. So again, obviously encourage you to discuss with your potential insurers, and I think they always say about T's and C's and whatever else, but from our point of view, I couldn't think of any way in which participating in any of our clinical trials would potentially have an impact there.
No problem at all. And seems like we've got a famous question here. Kimi Kardashian's dropped in asking how to sign up.
Well, look, just like everybody else, Kimi, we'd love to have you sign up to do our trials, and there's plenty of ways, and I'm not sure if Josh is going to share some links potentially later, but typically just via the website or some of the social media channels, there's opportunities to click some links there to have a look at what trials might be available and to, you know, at a first level assess your eligibility there.
No problem at all. One question that's come through quite a bit. Do I have to pay tax on this? Can you get paid under the table? There's a lot of questions regarding the payment options. I know it's not your area, Paul, but any comments on that?
Yeah, I'll start off with that one. So we have a very open and transparent remuneration schedule. So we certainly value everyone's time for coming along and helping us with the trialling of these medicines and vaccines. So we do obviously pay people for the inconvenience of participating. And as I say, we're very grateful for that. There's no changes in payment based on risk or danger or anything like that. I mean, certainly we don't think any of our products that we trial have any significant risk or danger that would justify that, but it's certainly not the case. And then in terms of how we pay, obviously it's above the table, and it's subject to usual sort of income tax and other things. Again, far from being an accountant though, and always recommend people seek individual financial advice, but it's basically payment as you would receive for any other activity for which you receive an income.
Another comment that's come through. Hannah, how did you find out about trials and how did you sign up?
I actually had a friend refer me. I, like many other people, experienced some pretty tough times over the COVID period and found myself a little bit short on cash. Let me admit that did play a factor initially. So I had a friend refer me and give me a link. It was pretty easy to book an appointment. I had a great conversation with somebody over at Nucleus Network who discussed the potential trials I was eligible for. Went ahead and booked in, got through phase 1, got through phase 2. It was pretty smooth, pretty easy to do.
Excellent. Got another one coming in. Whoop. Scott Link asks, what are some of the medical areas that Nucleus have upcoming trials for?
Look, that's a great question. It is subject to change over time. We do a really wide variety of trials, and in fact, we have quite a number of investigators there now, each with their own interests in some ways. My interest as an infectious diseases specialist is very much in vaccines to prevent infection. So we have quite a few of those, including COVID vaccines. There are likely to be many more COVID vaccines required, so we're still trialling some of those, as well as vaccines for other infections. But then we also have medicines, so therapies or treatments for all sorts of other conditions as well. So again, something to take a look at the website regularly to see what's available. And in terms of benefits of being in clinical trials, while obviously the people in the trial, if we're doing healthy volunteer trials, won't derive any direct benefit from receiving that medication, it makes such a difference. And if people know people with a condition, for example, and then that's a way they can, I guess, really help develop new medicines as well as vaccines for those sort of conditions by coming along and being part of our trials.
No worries. A question that has come up too is, Hannah, do you work for Nucleus Network?
No, I don't. I fortunately was able to get a job post-COVID, and I'm currently sitting in a meeting room right now at that office, so we are not one and the same.
No worries. Another one that's just come in from Alison Jacques Condy. If one is on a clinical trial and it's coming to an end, is it possible to sign up for another or wait till it's over?
We do always want clinical trials to be concluded before people sign up for another one. As I was saying earlier, we want as fewer variables as possible so we get the most information out of these trials. And if someone was potentially in 2 trials at once, it would make it really hard to interpret those results. So we always make it really clear that people need to have most definitely finished a clinical trial before they sign up for another one. But again, that's something that when people come along to consent and find out about the trials, we tell them basically how long it'd be before they could look at signing up for another trial afterwards, because the time after a trial's finished before you can start over is a bit variable depending on a few things.
No problem. Charlie Petty just put in a question to Hannah. Do you know if you received a placebo or a real trial after your trial?
I actually didn't even think to ask that question until you've asked it yourself. No, I don't know. I still don't know. So there you go.
I might jump in there and just add a little bit to that. So if people are keen to find out, and we do hear this a bit more in our vaccine studies, for example, if people are keen to know whether they received an active or a placebo, at the conclusion of the trial, we can let people know that. Obviously, before the trial's over, we don't tell people that because we want to make sure we can assess them in an unbiased fashion. But that is something people can find out at the conclusion of trials.
I guess you and I will have a chat after this, Paul.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Another one that's come through. Do you do cannabis trials?
We actually have done some cannabis trials in the past, and obviously it's a rapidly expanding medical area and shown to be highly effective for many conditions. But as far as I'm aware at the moment, we're not actively recruiting for one in that space, but it is something that we may do again in the future, I guess.
No problem. One that's in the email. Do I get to choose what study I'm in?
So basically, yes. I mean, basically people get to choose whether they participate or not and in which study they would like to participate in. Again, we often have a range of trials potentially available and people are able to have a look to see what might suit them the best in terms of the schedule or how long the trial goes for example. So, but the main thing there is that participation from the outset to the very end is entirely voluntary, and our volunteers are free to come along or not, or to withdraw at any stage if they find out the trial's not for them. So your participation is completely voluntary.
No worries. I'll redirect to Hannah too. Did you choose your trial or did you just go to the first one you saw?
Ooh, I don't recall. I believe I chose it. I think the trial that I chose to take part in, I felt really comfortable with based on the description that was available. And I felt like it was a good fit for me based on what the medication was that was being tested. So yeah, I keep an eye on the website and check which trials are coming up to see if there's any more that strike me in that way all the time.
Excellent. one that's come in that's probably more an ethical dilemma. Why don't you test it on prisoners and people on death row instead of the public?
Okay, really interesting question, actually. So we make sure that everyone who participates in our trials is doing so on a completely voluntary basis, and obviously with no coercion or biases or other things at play there. So if we were to do it on people in those sort of situations, it would be really easy to see that there might be some kind of issues with coercion or people feeling like they have to participate for whatever reason, and we certainly don't want to do that. All of our trials are completely voluntary. And so that's why we do it in this way and don't do it on people who are potentially in some of those challenging situations where that voluntary basis might be able to be questioned. But, as I say, we are really grateful to all of our volunteers who do come along and do so on an entirely voluntary basis to help us, progress with the development of new medicines and vaccines.
And how do you feel about that, Hannah?
No, I completely agree. I think it's important that everyone has their own choice, and part of the reason why I was able to participate is because, I'm healthy and I had the time to do it, and I recognize that that's a luxury that not a lot of people have. So helping out somebody with a disease because I happen to be healthy was a cool choice that I was able to make for myself.
Excellent. Just got one in from Mitchell Orth. What are the visits like? When it says something like 12 visits, what do they look like time-wise? Where are they? What happens in those visits, etc.?
Yeah, good question. And obviously we go through all of those points at the first visit so people understand what the sort of time commitment is they're looking at. And, there is a little bit of flexibility with a lot of those visits as well, and how much will be, spelled out in some detail when people receive the information about the study. A lot of those visits are typically fairly quick, and what they might look like is a bit of a discussion with one of our staff members as to basically how people are going. Sometimes there are some basic assessments like observation, so maybe blood pressure or weight, temperature, for example, so those things that are pretty easy to get. And on some of those visits, there's likely to be a blood test as well. So we do a lot of blood tests to make sure that there are no safety signals in those blood tests, but also to measure the levels of the drug itself or antibodies if it's a vaccine, for example. So there's a few things like that at each visit. Most of the visits are pretty quick. Some of them take a bit longer, but we go through the total time commitment and basically all of the things we ask of our volunteers at that first visit, where they get to make that choice as to whether they want to go ahead or not.
And Hannah, how was your visit?
Yeah, so I actually took part in a trial that was an inpatient study. So I stayed a couple of nights at one of the facilities, and I think I had one follow-up visit after that. So it was great that I was sort of sitting there with a heap of other participants as well, that you got to sort of get to know and meet a heap of people, and that was great. And afterwards, just one quick visit and it was all over really quick, actually.
Excellent. Charlie Petty's got another follow-up question. How long do most trials go for participants?
It's really variable. We have some studies that are a small number of weeks through to studies that might take up to a year. And, that's some of the things that people can have a look at when they're contemplating which study to participate in. For example, if someone was looking at moving away in 6 months, then a year-long study might not be for them. So the sort of time commitment is very individual and depends very much on the type of product that's being assessed and what sort of assessments we need to do. So, as I say, studies range from a small number of weeks out to probably 1 year.
And how long was yours, Hannah?
Oh, mine was, I believe it was 3 nights from memory. It was 2 or 3 nights, one of the two.
No worries. A question that's been asked by several people is, what would happen if there was a reaction to something during the trial?
Look, that's a great question, and we make sure we go through with each and every volunteer that, as I said earlier, that every potential medicine and vaccine has some side effects, and we go through what we think those potential side effects are. And as Hannah really rightly said earlier, we watch our volunteers really closely while they're on study. So if you're doing an inpatient study where you might have to stay in the unit for a few days, you'll find that our nurses will talk to you very often and do some observations, and there'll be periods of time when we do blood tests as well. So we look really carefully. So if there is going to be any kind of reaction, often we'll pick it up really early and we can manage it. But, if we were to see a severe reaction, we have lots of really well-trained staff, lots of doctors around, lots of really well-trained nurses, and we're all really well-trained in managing those things. So we'll get on top of them quickly and make sure people are back to normal really quickly as well. So fortunately, we do very rarely see very significant effects because we do take so much care in working out which studies we do and making sure they're safe for our volunteers. So we rarely see any really significant problems because of all those measures we go to make sure our volunteers are protected throughout.
And was that your impression too, Hannah?
Yeah, absolutely. And when I was staying inpatient, honestly, the unit that I was at looked no different to a hospital. So they're clearly incredibly well equipped and really well staffed with tons of nurses all the time, almost to the point where you're being watched so closely, you kind of feel like, guys, come on. But it's a great problem to have. So people are absolutely paying attention to what's happening.
Excellent. Megan Barth just asked, when you're participating in an inpatient study, are you provided with enrichment activities like access to TV and board games and stuff, or do you provide your own entertainment?
Ooh, bit of both. I saw a couple of different setups in the participants for our study. I think there was one guy who was working at the time, so had his work laptop set up. There was another guy who had a full gaming laptop set up, and then a few of us who would hang out and play board games together. And I think there's even a pool table at the place I was staying at. So it's really cool. Honestly, you kind of create your own fun, and it's great that you get to meet so many new people in the environment as well.
Excellent. A question that's popped through, can I do a trial if I've already been vaccinated? I'm assuming they're talking about the COVID vaccine.
And the short answer there is yes. I mean, there may be some of the COVID vaccine studies we're doing where the timing of that vaccine may be a factor, but the short answer there is yes. There are lots of studies we can do with people that have already received their COVID vaccine, and it's very likely that people that have had their vaccine will be eligible even for some of the COVID vaccine studies. Again, a little bit dependent on timing. And the other thing I'll say there is well done on having your COVID vaccine if that's already happened, and I'd certainly encourage people to do that if they're still considering it.
No problem. One that's just come through, are these things run out of someone's basement?
I can assure you that's not the case. We actually have an amazing unit that's purpose-built, as we heard, very well resourced. It's an amazing facility, one of the best in the world, in fact, that was built for this purpose so that we can safely house our volunteers, we can carefully observe them, but they can have enough privacy when they need it, and there's enough things to keep them occupied there that no one gets too bored on site.
That would be the fanciest basement I had ever stayed in, if so.
No worries. One that's just came in. Hi, I'm Japanese. I've been thinking to participate in trials. Are there any trials for Japanese of Asian or Asians recently? I think that's a question about our specifically targeted trials. So, Paul, if you'd like to talk about that.
Yeah, that's fascinating, actually. We've done some trials where we've actually looked for specific ethnic groups, with particularly looking for certain drugs, trying to see if they can be approved in other countries. So we look for people of those ethnicities at our site to facilitate that process with those drugs and therapies and things. So sometimes we put a specific call out for people, like people that are Japanese, and in fact we have a call out at the moment for people of Japanese heritage or Japanese ethnicity. So I'd certainly encourage you to take a look at the site, and sometimes we do that with other ethnicities as well. So but again, if you have specific questions like that, and particularly that one that's very timely, because we are definitely looking for people who are Japanese at the moment, definitely take a look, and you can help develop a medicine that would hopefully then be able to get it approved over in that country.
No problem at all. A question's come through too about COVID-19 vaccine trials. A person's been in them and is asking, you asked to use contraception during it. Is that the case for all trials or just for that one?
Yeah, I think there's a few bits to this question. So we often do speak a lot about contraception on our trials, and not because we're at all worried that whatever it is we're testing will cause problems if someone wants to get pregnant, but just because the drug or vaccine is early in its journey, we don't have data to know for sure it is safe in that case. So we want people to, excuse me, to make sure they don't fall pregnant while they're on our studies, and that's basically nearly all of our studies. So we do bug people a little bit with questions about contraception, and sometimes maybe even be seen to be going a bit over the top in that regard, but it is something we try and make sure of. And again, as I say, not because we expect there'd be any problem if that happened, but just because we don't have enough data to be 100% confident that that's not the case. And I think part of this question too was relating a little bit to the UQ vaccine, and that wasn't because of any issues with passing on that false positive or that diagnostic interference issue. It's definitely not transmissible, and that wasn't what the contraceptive in that trial was about. As I say, it was just about making sure that nobody conceives any children while they're on our studies.
Excellent. That one's a bit more in depth than we'd expected. But another one that's come through is for Hannah. Can you talk to other people while you're in the trial, or is it just the nurses?
I'm a talker. If I couldn't talk, don't think I would have done it. No, you definitely can. So you don't discuss specificities about what it is you've taken or any side effects you're having. Obviously, there's good reasons for not discussing, those side of things. You don't want to contaminate results, presumably. But yeah, you absolutely chat to people, get to know people, meet them. It's cool to hear about why people chose to do the trial and their certain life experiences, and yeah, just meet a whole heap of new people. But we don't discuss the process from the medical side.
One that's been asked a few different ways: has anyone died or been really badly injured as a result of one of these trials?
The short answer there is no. So definitely nobody's died. We have had people reporting injuries on our studies, but not any related to the trials. In fact, when we have people on studies for long times, and as I said earlier, some of our trials maybe go for a year. We've had people that have fallen down cliffs and had car crashes and things like that, but we've never had any really serious issues with any of the products we trial. And again, that really comes back to all the work that goes into making sure that we're very confident with the safety of whatever we take into the clinic before we start. And the other point there is it's not only up to me to be confident with that and other staff within Nucleus Network. All the studies we do get reviewed by at least an independent ethics committee with lots of members, including, for example, consumer representatives and scientific experts. So again, they have to be completely confident that the product, whether it be a medicine or a vaccine, is both likely to be very safe and highly effective, or they don't approve for us to do the trial. So there's lots of layers here to make sure that what we do is safe.
I'd love to add something on that if I could.
Of course.
Yeah, one part of post-trial that I really liked was that after we had left the clinic, we were provided a card with details about the trial that we had taken part in, and how to contact that manager of the trial. So if worst case something had happened, like a car accident, somebody who was treating me, if I didn't have consciousness, for example, had the ability to go back and find out what it was that was involved in that. So I thought that was a really great extra step that the Nucleus did, and it kind of thinks more to the aftercare side as well. That really impressed me.
Yeah, there's been a follow-up actually about that. So what sort of ethics does the trial have to pass before it goes to humans?
Yeah, great question. It's actually quite a long process. So basically a sponsor or someone who's making a new drug or vaccine would come, and there's a few different ways this can happen that are subtly different, but that often come to us. And internally, we would review that, and we have lots of medical doctors like myself with a lot of experience in this who carefully review the data that supports that drug or vaccine, and then other people in the company will also review it. But often there are a number of other external layers of assessment and approval. So definitely an ethics committee, an independent ethics committee with a number of experts and consumer representatives also have to review it, be very comfortable with the data supporting the use of that drug or vaccine, and all of the information that supports it. But often there are others. Sometimes there are other independent expert committees. And often there's also another company involved to help to oversee the trial who sit outside of the people who make it and the people that run the trials. That's us. And they also assess it, make sure they're very comfortable with the safety and the likely efficacy. And they also provide a lot of oversight in terms of checking on the data, checking on how the study's going, making sure it's being run according to protocol. So often there are, the bare minimum are 3 different groups who are overseeing things from the outset to the completion, and sometimes there are other groups as well. So it's a very tightly regulated industry for very good reason. And that's because we're all about making sure each and every volunteer, is safe and can safely and voluntarily participate in these clinical trials to help us develop these products. So yeah, there's lots of regulation, but they're for good reason.
Excellent. We're almost out of time, but I've got one last question. It's a follow-up. Sarah says, am I able to take part in trials in Australia from outside of Australia? So I assume that's a border question as much as it's a trial question.
Unfortunately not. We don't do virtual trials or trials remotely. So at this stage, at least, all of our trials do involve physically attending our clinical trial sites in Melbourne and Brisbane, and one overseas, but not yet in Japan, unfortunately. So as I say, at the moment, all of our trials do involve physically attending the study sites.
Excellent. Well, we've just reached our time. If anyone's got any more questions, feel free to put them in the comments and we'll get some answers back to you if you'd like them. Otherwise, you can visit our Nucleus Network website at nucleusnetwork.com and see what information we've got there, or register for a trial if you're interested. Thank you for your time, Paul. Thank you for your time, Hannah. Much appreciated.
All right.
Thanks, everyone, for listening in.